Hey everybody, I am back today to continue this series in painting the skeletons from the Castle Ravenloft Dungeons & Dragons miniature game. This is part of a step-by-step series where I go over different techniques that I'll likely refer back to when people ask me questions. Today we're going to talk about washes, and this in some ways is sort of like a type of shade. I could call it shading. Initially, when I was going to do this, I was going to do a couple of them differently, and I was going to show dipping or applying dip with a brush to show one way of doing shading and applying a type of, in some ways, a type of wash. I decided against it for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't really want to have my three look different. That's not the primary reason, but I actually thought, you know what, it probably, the washing that I'm going to do today probably deserves its own video. I'm probably going to do dipping just for outside of this series in a different video. And I'm not going to do it as part of painting these skeletons. It would be a bit of an easier way to do them, but I'm going to shoot for traditional methods and traditional washes today, and I think I can actually get a better effect. I'll talk a little bit about that later. I hope this one doesn't go too long. I apologize if it does, because I think that washes for me is a big area of model painting, and it was something that I never knew about before I started doing modeling and painting, you know, as far as applying them to kind of a sculpture to bring out effects. And I think that there's a wide variety of uses for them. We're going to talk about just two ways to use them today for the skeleton, but I'll start by saying that essentially a wash can be multiple things. They're made different ways, but essentially it's a very watered down paint, such that, you know, it can be like kind of like an ink. You know, it's such that it retains its uniformity. It doesn't pool and things too bad, but it actually goes in and brings out definition within your model. So we're going to use washes today to bring out the definition of the skeleton. Another way that washes are used at times is for general weathering and dirtying and shading. And we're actually going to use that too, because my skeleton that I'm going for, I told you, is not going to be the skeleton that's hanging up in the side of the room in your science class that's bleach bone white and perfect. But I'm going to get them grimy and dirty. And to do that, I'm going to use two different washes today. And I'm also then going to, in following videos, bring back some of the highlights and augment that dirtiness to bring them out even further. We'll see that. Now, I've used, just to round the subject out, I mean, you'll normally see a black, in this case this is the Citadel Nuln Oil and the Agrax Earthshade. This is sort of your brown and black wash that's very commonly used in the hobby. This is what we're going to use today. But there are a number of different brands. I just grabbed three different ones that I had on my shelf out in front of me and actually used for three different reasons. I mean, this is a model wash by Vallejo, and it's used to actually provide a dark rust on models, and particularly I like to use these for tanks and things, to use this. This is just a general red shade. A different, looks like it's Vallejo, it's just a different style. So it's not a different brand. And I guess I said three different brands, but you know what? I'm wrong. They're all the same brand. They're all Vallejo. They're just different three lines that they have. And this is Game Ink by Vallejo, another wash, and it's a skin wash. And so you can use this to provide definition similar to what I'm going to do today on the skeleton, but for human skin. And so I've also essentially made washes just by watering down paint heavily. That's tricky, you know, you have to get the right percentage, but essentially you can do that with just about any color. And as well for terrain, I actually like making my own washes, because I pride myself in when I work on terrain not using really expensive stuff, but just basically taking like a craft paint black and mixing it with just a little bit of, tiny bit of dishwashing soap and then a whole bunch of water, and you can create your own kind of washes. And so it's a broad area, you know, to discuss for painting, but I'm just going to sort of narrow down into how I did it when I first started, and how I still continue to primarily use washes today in many respects. And so a couple things I'll just mention. These are little tidbits from personal experience, but with this brand in particular, which is pretty common, you know, the Nuln Oil and the Agrex Earthshade, sometimes people like to mix them with water, mix them together. I actually like mixing these two together if you want to get a real grimy look for machinery and things like that. You know, something that's really weathered and grimy. Essentially with today I'm going to be using them separately and applying them a little bit differently. But if you add water to these brands, sometimes I've found that, and other people have too, seen it quite a bit on the internet, people talking about it, you can get a bit of a white residue that you don't want. And so like where the wash is in the crack, it'll just appear white. I think, and I don't know, but I think there's some sort of chemical that when you mess with the balance too much, of adding water to these, it causes a separation of some of the core chemicals that are used to make up the solution. And the easiest way that if you run into that and you use these products after my video, the easiest way that I've known to get rid of that, and it's not commonly happened to me, it's only when I've diluted it down, is to just use pure Nuln Oil or pure Agrex Earthshade. And I've noticed it more with the Nuln Oil, but just do another application of what you were setting out to do without watering it down so much or at all, and it should just darken it and take it away. And so so that's just a little tip if you do run into that. So what I'm going to do, my plan for this skeleton again, is first I'm going to both bring out the definition and make him really dirty, like he's kind of crawled out of an earthen grave, with Agrex Earthshade. So this is a brown. I'm going to liberally apply it all over the model. I'm going to skip a step that I often do, and part of it is because I use my airbrush to do it. I could do it with a brush, but I think I'm just going to see how I can manage without it, since I'm going to be doing a cleanup afterwards anyway. I oftentimes will varnish a gloss varnish over a model if I want things to go in and just hit the crevices. Because I actually want this to cover liberally, I'm not going to, but I've not shown how to varnish yet, and so that's usually a last step. But this is an example where I don't follow the rules. You know, I oftentimes will do steps out of sequence to get different effects, and so sometimes you can apply a gloss varnish and it'll allow sometimes the wash to slide into those crevices and stay away from the raised areas a bit more. Just another tidbit there, but I'm going to choose and elect not to do that today. So I'll start out by hoping today my camera remains in better focus. I think it was where I had my camera last time. That was a learning experience for me. But I'm going to start out by just putting some wash in a little well here. I'm going to start with the brown, and this is going to be a fairly liberal process. I'm not going to, well, what I mean by that is I'm not going to soak it in the wash, but I'm going to use a broad brush, and I'm going to just try to, I actually don't mind if it goes onto the raised areas too much. I'm not being, what I'm saying is I'm not being overly selective as to where it goes. Now I am going to try to avoid the top of the head a little bit. Like there are some areas where I don't want it to look dirty for sure later, and what I'm going to do is try to avoid those areas a little bit. It just presents less cleanup for the most part. Okay, so here I go. The first time I did this, I just thought it was so amazing. It's a basic principle, but it really does a great job at bringing the model to life. it's one of the neat things about painting a little sculpture is you can just take advantage of it not being a flat surface, you know, in a different way that normal painting, I think, because I'm actually not a painter by traditional standards. You know, I don't think you get to necessarily always appreciate that in a flat medium. Now, one of the things I'm going to do here, if I was only doing one wash, I would just not really care about where it's going right into that detail really heavily and pooling, but because I am actually planning on doing black after this, and specifically to hit those deeper areas, I'm actually going to just try to take out some of that pooling. To do that, I might just take the brush and just dab it away a little bit here and there. It might be just fine to leave it there. This is where I kind of experiment a bit sometimes. I'll be honest, I've never painted a skeleton like I'm doing today. I just decided, how do I approach this? I thought about how I paint other things. Because in the past I might just paint bone just with a dip actually. I've not went with like a traditional wash. But I decided I want this guy to look really cool, like he kind of came out of the grave. And I don't want him to be one-dimensional. Or two-dimensional is probably even a better way to describe it. By just sort of one shading. I want him to have a little bit more depth. And to do that, I'm attempting to selectively use two different kinds of highlights or washes, and then later we're going to highlight them to create more contrast to those two different types of tone shades. One of the things that one of the concepts that I've learned through watching YouTube videos and people that know more than me is that if you're trying to achieve realism, generally reality is random and has many dimensions. It's not two-dimensional and it's not really orderly in most cases. Please don't give me beehive examples and things that are going to prove me wrong, but that's just sort of just speaking in a general sense. And so yeah, so here we go. As you can see, I've really left the top of the skull kind of light on top. I have to do some cleanup on this anyway in a further video to bring back some of what I've done. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to do to my other miniatures, and I'm going to come back for the second wash. Just make sure I haven't forgot some stuff here. Nothing looks worse when you wash and then like you leave an area completely uncovered and you don't intend to. This sort of looks like an unfinished spot. Okay, be right back everybody. Well, that's it, up close right now. Hey everybody, so I am back. Here again, this is where we left off. I've finished my other two skeletons. Notice that I actually missed a spot up here when I was working earlier. One of the things that I am going to attempt to do now is I am going to actually notice that I missed another spot. Actually, sometimes you don't miss it, but it's just it doesn't cover the way you want it to, and I wanted to get a general cover here, but there we go. Real quick cover up. I'm going to use the Nuln Oil now to be more targeted. And I want it, really my goal for the last one, although it did go in and I think it made some beautiful definition, I went in purposely and pulled a lot of it out. If I hadn't have done that, you would see a lot more dark in the lines, which is what I'm going to do now with black. but I wanted to do this sort of two shade mechanism. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to cover the sword and the shield much in the same way that I covered this one, the skeleton. It's just going to cover it completely to get that and I'm not going to pull out anywhere. I'm not going to pull out like the definition anywhere. I'm just going to cover it liberally because I don't want. I could make the shield like a brown, and I could go for that effect, but I just want some black definition in there. I don't want it to at this point look dirty. Or at least with a brown. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to selectively put in black into just sort of like the fine details of this piece, just to create now two different tones of shade. One generalized all over, dirty, and then the black where truly the shadows are going. That's my sort of goal. Okay. So I'll just throw some of this in a well. I did have to step away for 1 second because I had some screaming kids coming into the house, not knowing that I was shooting a vid. Okay. So with this here, I'm going to be careful not to, with the effect I'm trying to achieve, I'm using a smaller brush. And I'm going to be careful not to oversaturate the model with wash because I don't want it to go all over. Problem is, sometimes I just don't put enough, and then the other problem is just getting it all over the place. Okay. I said I was going to start doing the shield, and actually that's what I'm going to do. Get back to my plan. Those meddling kids made me forget my plan. Scooby-Doo is quite big in our house. Or I should say is. Okay, that's kind of going to the definition there, kind of nice. Okay, so I'm actually liberally putting this on here. And I'll just surround it over the shield. And now I'll do the sword. Okay, so now I will proceed to painting the detail. And I'll start with just putting in the lines in the bones. Just dabbing it slightly to try to get it to pool where I want it to. And actually too much is not good in some cases. Okay, I've got to load up my well here again. Just dragging the wash up a little bit into some of that area there because it was welling up. I had some areas where I got a little bit more than really where I wanted, what I wanted to. And so I'm either pulling them out or I'm just going to have to fix them at a later stage. But what I'm kind of doing now is, by being selective, it's preserving the work that I did before with the covering up, but also, or I should say with just the Agrax or Earthshade, and trying to create just a dirty look. But so that's one thing, is I'm preserving that as best as possible. But I'm also creating less work later in some ways. In theory, I suppose. You know, I've always been one to try new things, even when they mess up and I have to do them over, or I have to try again and do it better in my next model. And to be quite honest, because I've never done a skeleton like this before, and I've done this, what I'm trying to do here on other things in different ways, different colors, different effects, different after techniques. But even today, like where I'm actually trying to show how I do Castle Ravenloft, I'm doing something that I would have done differently in the past and just trying something new. And I always encourage that, because I find that's the only way I actually get better at anything, is just by taking risks and, you know, messing up and then getting better. So I find what I was trying to really achieve, and it's starting to come out, I'm actually kind of happy about that, I think, is I'm trying to create that sort of haunting look of realism with the skeleton, where it has those black eyes looking at you, the dirty bone, and then we're going to make some striking contrast later, I'm hoping. I could go back to the Agrax Earthshade, but I'm trying to put a little bit more shadow where I think I've missed out. but then taking it away so it's not darker than the eyes. I want the eyes to be sort of penetrating. It's funny because a wash for me usually is a kind of a sloppy process, like the model does a lot of the work for you, but when I'm trying to do it this way, it shows how it can also be a bit of a game of patience too. So, I think, for the most part, that was what I was trying to achieve. Hopefully, compared to when I came back, it looks like a little more multi-dimensional than what it did before, because I've added another darker wash. Okay, so I'm going to do my 2 other skeletons, and this is, I suppose this concludes the video, because I've actually done the wash for this one. I'm not doing any more shading today on this guy, so next up will be the next technique video. But before I forget, he's standing on a wash. He's standing on a rock. I've said wash way too much in this video, and I just can't say anything else anymore. So I'm just going to cover that rock liberally with this wash, and it kind of just shows when it dries. You'll see it still looks gray, but it shows how even there it kind of picks up a lot of the crevices and things. Okay, thanks for watching everybody, and I will now proceed just to do my other 2 skeletons. Take care.